friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I'm here with a card and video for Create a Smile stamps. I'm going to be using the Create a Smile Eggstraordinary Egghunt stamp set, and I'm going to use all 4 of the critters from the stamp set to create 4 cards, and each of them is going to feature a rainbow alcohol ink background. So I almost said distress because I think of a ranger and I always think of distress first, but recently alcohol inks have become very popular and they're really fun to play with. I've had some for a few years and I'm trying to get back into using them with all the recent inspiration, and that way if I'm tempted by those new colors, I have some ideas for what to do with them. So to get started, I am coloring just the bunny on camera. I obviously used all 4 of them, they're all 4 colored, but I just going to color one because I'm using the same principle on every one of the animals, with the exception of the sheep. With the sheep, I colored it the same way as a base, and then over top of it, I went in with some little circles to kind of look like some fleece, or not fur, but fleece for the sheep. So what I'm doing is I'm starting with my darkest color and adding in my shadows first. I recently switched to this as I find that it uses a little bit less ink, and that with a high quality paper you get just as good of a blend with a little bit less time and, as previously mentioned, ink, because you don't keep going over it as many times. Whereas if you lay down your lightest color first, you're going to use a lot of those light colors, and I found that my light colors really did start to run out pretty quickly. And I'm hoping to sort of switch to this method and get really used to just coloring with the darker colors first. In terms of high quality paper, I actually use Michael's Recollections 110 pound cardstock for my Copic coloring. I find that because I'm used to it, I learned how to color on it. I can get it to blend just fine. I actually had trouble with the Nina because I was used to the Recollections, so I think you can kind of get used to whatever paper you want to learn to color on, as long as it has a certain amount of thickness. The 110 pound Georgia Pacific from Walmart is really tricky to try to work with alcohol inks. It really absorbs a lot of your ink, and you can do it, but I wouldn't recommend it. I used V12, 15, and 17 for the purples, and for the pinks I'm using R22, 20, and 00. As you can see, I just pulled out my Sandy Allnock hex chart. I really like the hex chart because it helps me to see good color combinations, and I find it to be a bit more helpful than just a swatch book because the colors are right next to each other and you kind of see the relationship between them, whereas with a swatch chart, it's a little bit harder to see, and I just didn't have as easy of a time picking out colors with a traditional swatch book. I colored the shadows to be on the edges of the bunny, and I did that with all of them because I am not creating a scene. There is no actual light in the scene. Instead, it's just to give a little bit of depth and dimension to the critters. And since they're shaped like an egg, I want that to make sense, and I want it to be darkest on the bottom and on the sides so that they have that shape to them that would make sense for an egg. If you were putting them in a scene, you'd want to think more about where the light source of the scene, if you're putting it to the left or the right, as you create everything else. But honestly, a lot of times I just color with a center light source, and it tends to look pretty good. I think what really kicks your coloring up is having any of that contrast at all. I think that there are people who make amazing, beautiful scenes, but if that's not your thing, if you don't really want to worry about the light source, just kind of think about those simple things like how do you make it look round and dimensional. So we're going to move on to the alcohol ink backgrounds. I'm going to create 4 slightly different backgrounds. They're not going to be wildly different, and that's just because I was kind of having a play and trying to figure out what was the best way to create stripes, essentially. If I, instead of mixing the colors all together, if I wanted something a little bit more controlled, what would be the best way to get a controlled look, but still have that beautiful flowiness that is what kind of makes alcohol inks shine? So my first strategy was to drop some ink and let it slide down the paper and see if that would create a stripe. I found this pretty tricky to do because if you got even a drop of ink too far to the left or the right, you could ruin the stripe or wind up making the stripe way wider than you initially intended to do. So I accidentally dropped orange onto the corner where my red was supposed to be, and so then my red kind of, like, I could never recover that because there's still that orange there. So even if I layered more red on top of it, they are translucent and you'll see them. And then here with the blue, that first drop of blue went way far to the left than I ever had wanted it to. And so this is something where you kind of have to be okay with things not being too perfect. You have to kind of work with it. And I still think it looks very pretty, just that it may not be the best if you really want a controlled look. What I do like about it is it has really clear edges, so you kind of see where the ink pulls up a bit on the edges, and I think that that's always like a fun look. It has that really, really dark line. You can particularly see it between the green and the yellow and the blue and the green, and I think that's interesting, and it adds a very sort of artsy feel to it. And when they layer on top of each other, you do get that overlap color, which is pretty cool. For all of the backgrounds I'm creating, I'm using either terracotta or mountain rose for the red. I'm using sunset orange, sunshine yellow, meadow for the green, sailboat blue, and purple twilight. For my next background, I knew that I would get more control with this method, and I wanted to see how it looked. To me, it's not as pretty. I like it, and if you really want a very clear, controlled look, this is definitely what I would recommend. I am taking a little bit of each color, and I'm putting it on 1/2 of the alcohol ink felt tool. So, I just have that sort of standard square tool, and I put a couple drops of ink on it, and then I'm rubbing it in a stripe. So it's kind of messy stripe, of course, not a clear stripe, which you could do as well if that's more what you were into. And I'm sort of dotting it on. And I'm actually being able to get 2 colors on one piece of felt by using the left side for one color, then the right side, and just sort of tapping that edge down because I have kind of narrow stripes. And since you are supposed to throw out the felts every time you use them, this is slightly more economical. I don't know that you really have to throw out the felts every time. There is a potential fire hazard of them, essentially because there is, alcohol inks are flammable. And so storing them could be a potential hazard, and so that's important to keep in mind. Because I wasn't really super loving the very controlled background, and I hadn't had fantastic success with the first background, I am trying a slightly different version of it and just putting a lot more ink on the paper and really just putting drops all the way across. This, again, more ink is, obviously is using more of your alcohol inks, whereas the first method I let it sort of drip down and I wasn't using as much. So I am not particularly worried about ever running out of alcohol ink just because I've had these for years, and if I do run out, I'll just go purchase more and it'll be fine. I think sometimes we worry about using too much of our supplies. But anyway, with that in mind, what I noticed is because I was really saturating the paper, it really blurred the lines between each color. And I think that if you wanted to try this method, you would be better off letting each color dry in between, or what I did here, where I skipped a color and I left the white space. So that way it would have a little bit of drying time in between. So I also went over with the orange again because once I laid it down, I realized that the yellow and red sort of ate up the orange. They, kind of bled into the orange area and it wasn't as defined. So I went back in and added more. And I wound up doing the same thing with the red. I probably, again, need to be a little bit more patient and let it dry. But as you layer, it does create some different looks and shapes to the alcohol ink. And so the first time through, it'll be the most smooth it's ever going to be. But as you put another layer on, the parts that are dry are going to layered differently, and the parts are still wet that mix together. And so you're going to see some more unevenness of the color, which is fine if that's what you like. That, I mean, the problem with alcohol ink is you have to let go and you kind of have to be okay with the fact that it's not going to be perfect all the time. And you see there, like when I dipped the tool in, it created a very clearly lighter patch. Or when I tried to add just a touch of purple to fix things, there's kind of a ring around it now. And so it's really hard to get a very, very controlled look. And then once I had that one ring, I was like, well, I should try to maybe add in some more rings so it looks like I did that intentionally. But now it looks very different than it did a second ago. And that's just kind of the nature of alcohol inks, and you have to decide what kind of look you're going for and how much control you want, because as you can see from these couple of different methods, you can get more and less control. I wanted to mention too that I am working on Seaside Stamping Ink Chroma Coat Gloss cardstock. I picked this up a couple years ago when I was playing with distress inks, and I still have some. It's great quality. It's a good price compared to Yupo paper, and you really have to work with a gloss paper. With alcohol inks, I have not found as good of results on any photo paper personally, but you know, give it a go, see what you personally like. I think this is a good one and a decent alternative to alcohol ink, sorry, to Yupo paper. It does soak in a bit more, which could be good or bad. You know, it might create better techniques than the Yupo paper that really sits where everything sits on top more and doesn't absorb as much. And so just like you kind of have to get used to how your alcohol ink markers are going to go on different papers, you're going to have to get used to how your alcohol inks in the, you know, bottle form are going to go on different papers. Of course, you don't want to use any sort of standard paper because it'll absorb right in. So this time I am just laying down drops, and I'm not trying to create a stripe. I'm trying to let it be a little bit more organic. I'm trying to leave a bit more space between the stripes, and I'm trying to mix the dot technique with the sort of rolling it around the paper thing that I did with the first time, by moving the paper, allowing that to move the inks. And this is actually probably my favorite. It just looks the most natural and organic, and I think I had to learn over time to let it go and, you know, not try to create stripes, because that's not what alcohol inks are really meant to do unless you're going to apply it with the tool. If you're going to apply it with the alcohol ink tool, you can create stripes. But if you're trying to drop it on, they're not going to be too perfect, and the more perfect you try to make them, the more you're probably going to drive yourself nuts. So I hope that that exploration was a little bit interesting to you, that maybe it gave you some ideas of ways to play around with alcohol ink. And now I'm ready to finish up my cards. I have the 4 backgrounds that I like to varying degrees. Some I like more than others, but they're all still really fun because they're all rainbows. And I mean, who's not going to be happy to see a rainbow? In order to finish them off, I'm going to use this "You Are Eggstraordinary" sentiment. So that way it can work for an Easter card, but if I don't remember to send it for Easter, it'll be okay, and it can just be a general spring card or an encouragement card. And I'm going to stamp that on black paper because I personally love the way that black looks against rainbows. And I'm going to white heat emboss it on the black paper so that it really pops. And I'm also going to put each of my critters on a Wonky Wavy stitched circle from Cat Scrappiness. And that will, again, let them pop because they will be on the black instead of directly on the rainbow backgrounds. But each time I do this, I'm going to just shake it up a little bit. The first time I'm going to do it kind of in the most simple way, where I lay my large sentiment strip all the way across the card, trim it off so that it's just a perfect black stripe across the card, center my circle up, and it's kind of just the most simple version. And it's kind of fitting because it's also with like the simplest version of the alcohol ink, since that's the one where I just used the felt tool. But then I mixed it up and kind of went a little bit different with some of the other ones. Like I either cut a banner shape or cut a slant on the sides of them. I sort of moved my critter off to the side, and just little tiny ways that they were different to make them a bit more interesting and not too perfect. So that is it for my cards today. I hope you enjoyed this play with alcohol inks, and I will leave you links in the video description to all of the products that I used, as well as to the Create a Smile blog, where you can check out the full post, and you can also check out their challenges. They have, I think, a bi-weekly challenge now, or like 2 times a month, whatever we call that. And so they're giving away prizes with that. So be sure to check that out as well. If I'm not mentioned, please give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. Thank you so much for watching. Have an awesome day. Bye.